and welcome to A Call to Arms, a series of interviews with senior UK military leaders. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Airbus, who are sponsoring this series for us. In this episode, I'm joined by Lieutenant General Rob Magowan, Deputy Commander of UK Strategic Command, to discuss multi-domain integration. Prior to taking up his current role, General Magowan served as the Assistant Chief of Naval Staff for Capability and Chief of Staff for Navy HQ before assuming the post of Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff for Capability and Force Design. General, thank you so much for joining us today. Integration is obviously an issue, a topic that's very much at the forefront of defence at the moment. So really looking forward to you helping us get to grips with some of those questions. I was wondering if you could start off just by providing us a bit of background. What is integration in defence terms? Why is it being done, and sort of what's led us to where we are now?
Well, thanks, Ali, and maybe I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes just trying to answer that. And I think the best way to start is to draw a metaphorical picture. When I was the commander of the Joint Forces Intelligence Group up at Whitton in Cambridgeshire, part of Defence Intelligence, part of Strategic Command today, we watched in front of our very eyes Russia exploiting Syria in a way that we hadn't seen before. They were putting land forces into Syria. They were firing cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea. They were posturing in the Eastern Mediterranean with SSK submarines that had a launch capability, didn't actually use it, but they had it. They were dominating the influence and information space through the Assad regime. They were dominating the airspace. They were piloting a whole range of autonomous capabilities. And they were doing this quite overtly. In fact, we were able to intercept a whole bunch of things that we were quite surprised we were able to do so, but they were showcasing multi-domain integration in reality. And that was back in 2015, 2016. Their ability to do that at range, both geographically and from a philosophical perspective, was really striking. And I think UK Defence thought, I'm not sure we can do this. And we need to do it to match what was the threat there in that part of the world, but also to compete in that space. And so I think we started to talk about multi-domain integration from that point, and very much in line with what we were doing with our allies anyway. But there are a whole bunch of other reasons too. But we've got to be threat-led, but that was the key driver. I think traditionally, UK defence has been quite single domain focused. I've spent a lot of time in the Navy. I've led the Maritime Force Development Directorate, Capability Directorate, and we have been maritime focused, necessarily so, but not as aware as probably we need to be with regard to the other domains, particularly the emerging domains of space and cyber. And therefore, we've developed a rather siloed and pretty platform-centric approach rather than an integrated capabilities approach. And what this has meant is that the huge explosion of data and information across the battle space has now become quite stovepiped, and our ability to exploit it across all of these domains, across all of this activity, has become much more challenging and much more urgent for us to get after it, not only because of the threat that we saw play out in front of our eyes in Syria, but also because there has been an explosion in terms of the mass of data that's been available to us. And of course, from a business perspective, this is just hugely inefficient, that we're probably developing capabilities that we may not need to if we were able to integrate them in a better way. But I think that what is it and why are we doing it? I think people can get seduced into thinking it is just about the tech, it is just about exploiting data. Yes, that is a part of it, but it's thinking about across 5 domains, so the 3 traditional, but also space and cyber. But it's also about, as the integrated operating concept says, integrating more closely with our partners across government, not least our UK intelligence community partners, but also with our allies. It's also about tempo, but it's not necessarily overwhelming our adversary across all domains all of the time. It can be that, but it's more about being able to operate across the totality of the battle space and delivering effect where and when we want to do it. And that's something that takes a level of dexterity that we haven't managed to bring to the fore in the past. And it's also about a range of effects. It's not just about a kinetic strike or a cyber strike. It's about dominating the so-called cognitive domain, so that influence and information domain that we've been really quite weak at in the past. So it's bringing the totality of that together in a single environment.
Thank you. That's one of the more clearer explanations I've certainly heard, and I think it does answer some of the questions. And I think one of those big questions is around allies. You mentioned we need to integrate with allies. We need to work with them. We're all facing those similar threats. So how do you see the UK approach comparing to the approach taken by allies? We look at the US with their multi-domain operations, and also the joint all-domain command and control, JADC2. Do you see any differences? Do you see any potential challenges with the different approaches taken across alliances?
Yeah, I think there's thematically, we're all moving in the same direction. And as you've mentioned, Ali, multi-domain operations is something that the US have termed. We're working closely with a colleague of mine, Vice Admiral Paul Bennett, on the NATO side in terms of their exploitation of the capability. They're using similar terms. So I think the overall approach, because of the threat that I've outlined, is pretty common, but the detail can be slightly different. The head of J6, the head of intelligence in the Pentagon, Lieutenant General Dennis Crawl, a fellow Marine, I'd had an hour and a half with him last week. He's coming to our RUSI conference next week. But I had a good conversation with him specifically about JADC2. You mentioned it, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. And that's very much focused at the technical end, the architectural end, the data standards part of the business. And we absolutely need to be hand in glove with the US there. The standards they set, the gateways they put in place, the identity access management systems, the ICAM systems through PKI that they put in place. We've absolutely got to be coherent with that, because if we're going out the door, the chances we're going out the door with our primary allies, not least the US. But JADC2 is a part of MDO, and our technical response through our digital backbone work is a part of MDI. So we need to have a broader conversation with the US, a broader conversation with our allies, which we're having. But we've always said that this is the major transformational program for UK defence, multi-domain integration. Therefore, it's big and it's hard. And so we're going to take this layered approach, that we're going to focus initially on the 5 domains within UK defence. Then we're going to work closely with our partners, and then we're going to work closely with our allies. Now, we're doing all of that in parallel, but in terms of our prioritisation, it's going that way. So I can talk more about the UK defence bit than I can about allies and the US, but that will start to change, not least as we see restrictions ease and we can get out and start talking to people in a more meaningful way.
Thank you. Picking up on some of those, some of the terms you use, siloed, stovepipe, platform-led, the transition with more data. There are obviously a lot of challenges. So I just wonder if you could expand a bit on some of the challenges that you see defence facing, regarding integration, and particularly interested in the role of strategic command in this, its relationship with head office, who's directing individual services. How is that sort of all being pulled together? Where does the responsibility lie with that? Where we have a new space command as well, and ensuring that that's brought into the fold. And then as well, how that works across government. Where is that coming from? Defence working into other aspects of government. Is that strategic command? Is that head office? And how do those relationships work?
Thanks. There's quite a bit in there. So if I try and break that down, I think to answer your first part of what are the main challenges, as Adrian Bagley, a good friend and colleague of mine in DNS said, you have a change program to change people's behaviours, to change culture. We can talk tech and we can talk programmatics, but ultimately it's human beings, and it's changing our collective behavior to invoke a change in culture. And that's the challenge, that people tend to reach for another platform which means greater volume, greater responsibility within that particular domain or that service, rather than go for a gateway or go for some data standards which might cost money. And so convincing people operationally that why don't you row back on those couple of platforms, because if you do these things, you will be able to access a whole range of collection that you weren't able to in the past. And convincing them of that, convincing ourselves of that, is the challenge. And then people will start to change their behaviors, because as soon as a program comes under fiscal pressure, then people are going to traditionally look for those areas where they can cut, which could be a gateway. And we've got to convince people that's the last place that we should go to. I think the second bit, and you've alluded to it, Strategic Command's role is to respect the role of Strategic Command as defence's integrator. And what does that mean? So we've now got formal authorities associated with being defence's integrator. And people need to understand what those are and buy into them. That if you come into the program, if you say, for example, bring the Future Commando Force into the multi-domain integration change program, then you're going to have to adhere to the data standards that we set. You're going to have to adhere to the architectural design that we set. You're going to have to go at the pace of all the other things you're going to need across defence, whether it be the ISR strategy or the strategic base that we're developing from this country. But the advantages are that we will champion you through strategic balance of investment into head office. We will report your programme to the chiefs of staff. We report your programme on a monthly basis to the vice chief. We will prioritise funding for you through strategic balance of investment. We will ensure that the resources we've got for experimentation are put behind your programme. So getting that balance right, bringing people in, seeing the benefits of it, but then respecting that authority is what is the challenge for us, and we're determined to get after that. The other bit, of course, is as conscious of who's on the call today, is we need industry to help us and for us to help industry on this journey. That I think we've been too cautious in the past and too commercially cautious, that we need to be up and dressed before we can speak to anybody. Otherwise, we feel we're going to be commercially fouled. I think we just need to take more risks. We need to have these conversations with industry much more regularly. Industry need to come back at us and say, we don't know what you mean, or do you mean this? This would be better. And we need to develop that agility. And we develop the agility by working out what are the things that we can be quicker with. What are those things that are just a widget and we can just be fast? And one of those things that's an astute class submarine, that's going to take decades. So we need to be more agile across the acquisition space through the Agile Acquisition Transformation Programme. And then conscious, Ali, of a couple of things you said, space. So Space Command is, as you know, set up on the 1st of April under new Space Commander Paul Godfrey Godders. We're working really closely with Space Command to ensure that precision navigation and timing, ISR and SATCOM, of which we are the capability sponsors for because they're pan-domain, are driven by our requirements into Space Command. And you mentioned government. So if I've mentioned what Strategic Command's role as defence is integrated within defence, what is our role across government? Well, there isn't one. And so it goes back to that conversation that we just haven't had that maturity of conversations yet with our partners across government. We need to do that.
Thank you. There is so much here, and I think what you've really highlighted is the complexity of it, and so many different strands that we need to take into account. Industry, how we work with government, how we work with allies. Just to very quickly pick up on something you mentioned, sometimes we tend to be a little bit thinking too much about the data, about the technology, and you mentioned people and how important that is. With personnel, with training, with that culture. Just wondering if you could very quickly expand a little bit on how you see that moving forward, what changes we might need to see in how we approach that people side of it to achieve integration.
Yeah, I mean, two points on that. I mean, we've been guilty, I think, in the past of being a bit network-centric. Network-enabled capability, NEC, was generally regarded as sort of a comms function that only J6-type comms people did. So we don't want to make that mistake again. Therefore, if I could draw a diagram, and we've got a slide on it, that describes the approach to MDI, it talks about a people line. It talks about an experimentation line. It talks about a capability line, a technological line. So it's a training line. So it's a much broader approach. And specifically to your question about people, so the CDS actually of the day is overhauling the officer career development pathways, and we're going to work closely with Chief of Defence People James Swift to develop an upgraded professional military education approach, PME approach, and we are determined to work with James's team to inculcate the philosophy of MDI, the conceptual approach of MDI, the operational art of MDI at every stage through an officer's career development. So the early stages of an officer's career would be domain specific. But as soon as you get to that junior staff college point, as soon as you sort of go into major Staff Officer 2 level, then you should be becoming what we are calling multi-domain aware. As soon as you get to a more senior rank, certainly at the full colonel level, and this includes civil servants, then we should be more than multi-domain aware. We should be multi-domain experts in certain areas. So inculcating this whole approach formally through PME is very much part of one of the key lines of the programme.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good to hear, because obviously, we need the people on board to actually help this happen. I think sometimes when people look at some of the strategies that come out about integration, it's sometimes seen as an end in itself. But obviously, it is working towards something. It is we're doing this to achieve something bigger. What is it that sits above integration, and so how do we know when we've actually achieved a level of integration that we can be happy with, it that can be seen as successful, rather than just continuing on with various integration programs sort of ad infinitum?
Well, first of all, we were very conscious when we set the program up that people would talk about it, and after a year say, my operational life has not got any better. You talk a good game, Magowan. You put some good slides up, and you talk about data exploitation and digital pathways and digital backbones, but I still can't find Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. So we vowed that we would work on 3 quick wins, and those quick wins are around the North Atlantic. They're about Eastern Europe. And they're about some work we're doing with Air Command in this country. So we're determined that those operational quick wins deliver real benefit by the end of 2022. And we've actually vowed that if we don't deliver operational benefit to those 3 programs and some more that are coming on stream now, particularly with the Navy, then we're going to close the program down, because the program is not delivering benefit. But it's also about force development. It's also about capability development. We're trying to develop an ISR strategy. We're trying to develop an approach to multi-domain integration of intelligent effect. And I've mentioned the Future Commando Force. So they're a much longer journey. They are sort of 5-year, 6-year, 7-year points that we want to develop capability over a period of time. And then to answer your question, what we've done through the program is we're developing an epoch approach. So by epoch 1, end of 2022, there are some very smart things that we've said that will be delivered, very much along the lines I've just declared in terms of those operational outcomes. Epoch 2 out to about 2025, bringing MDI meaning in the way that I described it, for example, in Syria, but higher than that, to those programs. And then beyond 2025, we'll be looking out towards the future operating concept, which we're working at the moment on behalf of CDS, where experimentation will come to the fore. So to answer your question directly, I'm not sure there is an end state. The end state is business as usual. As we brought a little bit of support in to help us, and the head of that team said to me within 10 minutes, he said, we need to close this program down. And what he's trying to say is we need to get this into business as usual. We don't want a dedicated program that's forcing people for cultural and behavioral change. We want to deliver integration by instinct. And integration by instinct is when you can close that program down. That's the destination.
Excellent, thank you. And obviously that what you mentioned about personnel and about training and that cultural change is actually, you know, central to that, and that new way of thinking. This is obviously an area that's not going anywhere. We're going to be seeing a lot more, and it's evolving. But I really appreciate your time today, just to help us dig down into some of those issues, some of those challenges that we're all facing, and hopefully, you know, in the future, you know, we can talk again and see what developments there have been, and how successful that's been. But thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks very much, Ali.